Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Imagine being eaten alive. Yeah, I know, you just sat down and that's what I start with. But bear with me. No pun intended. But the thing that's eating you doesn't care if you're alive or dead. It will let you feel every moment of that torment, as it makes chunks of you part of its digestion. That's messed up. And it has a bit too much to do with today's first story. Stay tuned for the start of the second hour, too, for a dramatic, nearly hour-long story about one of the most cursed places on Earth, 7-Eleven. These are tales from the break room. You can support me and all EerieCast shows. Sign up to be a premium member over at Eerie.fm. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive bonus stories, like the new one I read recently, called The Living Stomach, which is about a tree in Romania that apparently devours humans. You can find it on Eerie.fm. EERIE.fm. Thank you. Being a trail guide was fun, but there are reasons I don't do that anymore. From Green and Blue. I'm a fitness and outdoors TikToker with a decent following, but I'm not here to spout my own crap. I'm here because I get comments sometimes that say, tell us the worst things you've seen on the trails, or do trail guides have creepy stories? Yeah, we do. And yes, I used to be a trail guide, but I don't do that anymore. So at the request of my fans, here we go. 2 stories, both all too true. Some ground rules first. I'm not saying where I guide, and my following isn't huge, so I'm not here to tell you all about me or where to find me. So I won't be naming names, but if you've hiked with me, you might recognize a couple of details. For context, I'm a fitness guy first. That's my whole personality, my girlfriend would say. I would run trails for fun on my days off from running trails for work, which she finds insane. So the summer this first story happened, I was in great shape. I could move fast over rough ground, and it's probably the only reason I went back in when I probably shouldn't have. Let me explain. The first story. It was a few summers ago. I was doing a standard half-day group hike, where people book online and you get whoever you get. That day I had about 9 people. A couple of older couples, a bachelorette-ish group of women in their 30s who were lovely and asked good questions, 2 guys who were clearly there because their wives made them come, and this one young guy, college age, about 20, maybe 21, and he was there by himself. Solo bookings like that are not weird. I get them all the time. People want to be out in nature and they don't have anybody to go with. Totally normal stuff. I love a solo guest. They usually listen more. But this kid was off from the jump. I'll tiptoe here because I know quiet young man alone and kind of awkward describes about 1,000 perfectly nice people. And I'm not trying to be that guy who's like, I just knew he was a creep. I didn't know anything. But he did give off a vibe. You know when someone's quiet but it's a comfortable quiet versus quiet like holding a breath? It was the second one here. He didn't talk to anyone. Fine. But every so often when the group was spread out a little, he'd kind of drift up next to me, at the front, and ask me something. But the questions were kind of off. The first one I remember was, how far can you get off this trail before no one can hear you? And I gave him the normal answer, which was basically, sound can carry strange out here, stay on the trail and stick with the group. And I tried to make it light, and he nodded and dropped back. Then a little later, up at the front again, if someone got hurt back there, how long before you'd notice they were even gone? And I'm doing my friendly guide thing, so I said, well, that's why I do my head counts, buddy. That's my whole job. And again he just nods and goes back. The one that actually stuck with me, he asked it real low, when we were the only 2 within earshot. He goes, do you ever lose people? Not have you ever lost someone, which would be a normal morbid curiosity question that I would get like once a month. Do you ever lose people? Present tense, like a habit, like asking a baker if they ever burn the bread. I laughed it off uncomfortably. I mean, I was being paid by these customers, and 99% of the time the weird guy is just a weird guy. But I started doing my head counts more often, just in case. Every bend, basically. 999. Everything was fine. We hit the turnaround point. There's a little overlook spot people take their photos and eat their granola bars at, and I give a spiel about the geology. And I do my head count again. 8. I didn't panic right away. People wander off to look at something or to pee, so you just wait a couple of minutes and they come back. If not, you call out until they come back. So I did that. I got everybody settled at the overlook. I told the 2 reluctant husbands to keep an eye on the group, and I walked back down the trail a bit, calling out for him. I'll just call him the kid, because I genuinely don't want to say his name. I did not get an answer. I went back maybe a quarter mile, to roughly the last spot I was sure I'd seen him, which was the section where the trail runs along a slope, and there's a big cluster of trees just off the downhill side. But there was nothing. I didn't see the kid. My first feeling wasn't, oh no, he's hurt. Instead, it was pure, cold, and selfish panic about me. I'm the guide. I'm the one who's responsible, I thought. A guy asked me a bunch of unsettling questions about disappearing, and then just disappears. And all I can think is, this is gonna get pinned on me. I'm gonna be the last person who saw him, the suspect. There's gonna be search teams and police out here. My face is gonna be on the news, the guide who lost a hiker. And even if I did everything right, my whole little career, the videos, all of it, gone. I was 26 and dumber than I am now, and that's where my brain went. So I made a decision, looking back, was the right call for the wrong reasons. I gathered the group and I led them back to the trailhead early. I told them there was a weather thing coming in, which was a lie. The sky was perfect. Nobody complained too much. I made doubly sure everyone got to their cars, and I was friendly about it. I waved and did the whole thing. The second the last car pulled out, I turned around and jogged back in. Alone. Which, if you've watched any sort of hiking safety video, you know is the exact thing I would tell people never to do. The sun was getting low. I had maybe 2 hours of decent light, less if I went in the trees. I moved fast. It's kind of funny. All that running I do, that was maybe the one time it actually paid off and mattered. I covered ground quick, and I was barely winded. I got back to the slope section, the one with that cluster of trees downhill, and I stopped. I really looked this time, instead of just glancing about. And I saw it off the trail down the slope about 40 feet. A backpack. His backpack, propped up against a tree neatly, like he had just carefully set it down. That should be a reassuring sign. Like, oh good, he was here, probably recently, and he's fine. But instead, all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Why would you take your pack off and leave it 40 feet off the trail down a slope and never come back to your group? I went down the hill. I had to be cautious. The slope was loose, and I didn't want to be the second guy who needed rescuing. When I got to the pack, next to it, I saw a shoe. Just one shoe. A trail runner, decent brand actually, lying on its side. But just the one. I stood over it, with my heart going about 180, thinking, okay, he's probably just hurt. He slid on the slope and fell, but he's nearby. I can probably find him before sundown. I started to call his name again. I began to move around the trees, looking down into the brush, checking the steeper drop below. I was right under this big tree, an old tree with thick branches. It had tons of foliage. You couldn't see up into it. I was standing there scanning the slope below me when something landed splat on my head. It felt like a wet towel dropped from a height, and it landed flat across the top of my head and somewhat on the side of my face. But it felt warm. Not like the sun, but more like body warm and wet. My whole body, every part of me reacted before my brain did. I made a sound I've never made before or since, and it wasn't the manliest sound, I'll admit. I grabbed at it with both hands. I had this instinct to just get it off of me. So my hands shot up and yanked it off, and I held it out in front of me. I looked at it. I don't want to be super graphic here. I don't want to gross you out. But what I was holding in my hand was skin. A human face, peeled off mostly in one piece and still warm in my hands. The face belonged to that kid. I dropped it and screamed again, and I ran straight up that slope. Everything after that was such a blur, I barely remember it. But before long, I was in my car with the doors locked and my hands shaking so bad, I thought I might be having a stroke too. I was covered in blood. I picked up my cell phone and called it in. Finally, I did the responsible thing. I waited there for the rangers and the sheriff, and I told them everything, including the part where I came back in alone, which I think probably made me look a bit bad. And somehow, even though I think I deserved it, I didn't get in trouble. But that's probably because they figured out what happened, or what they think. The working theory. They told me it pretty plainly afterward. They think it was a mountain lion, a cougar. We have them here, and people forget we have them because basically you never see one. But that's kind of the whole point of the mountain lion itself. They don't want to be seen. But the theory was the kid wandered off trail. He sat down, took off his pack, and got ambushed. Cats like elevation. They'll haul a kill up into a tree and cache it, but they'll come back to it later, feeding over a couple of days. They drag prey up there to keep it from scavengers. The flesh that hit me was still warm. Still warm, and it had just fallen from the tree I was under, calling that dead kid's name, scanning the ground while the thing that had just killed him was probably only 10 feet over my head, enjoying part of its meal. They never said it for sure beyond that, but the read I got from the way one of the rangers wouldn't quite look at me when he said, "You should consider yourself extremely lucky you ran when you did," which meant that cat was up there the whole time, watching me. And something, me being loud or moving around under it, who knows, knocked part of its cache loose, or dropped it right from its mouth. I've genuinely had people online tell me cats will sometimes drop part of a kill as a sort of warning that this is mine, back off. No idea if that's even true. I don't even want to know, to be quite honest with you. None of what I'm telling you do I want to remember in the slightest. But it's these types of things you remember the most. They closed that trail for a while, and I didn't guide again for 2 months. But I would go back. This brings me to the second story. This one, there is no explanation for at all. And don't worry, nobody dies in this one. This one was just a family, mom, dad, and 2 kids who were 10 and 13, old enough to handle a real trail. This was a different trail than the first story, but the same general area, the kind of low mountain wooded trail where you're under canopy most of the way. It had been a private booking, just the 4 of them and me, and those were always my favorite kind of day. When it's just a family, families are easy. Kids ask fun questions that are easy to answer, and they're always excited by the answers. The 13-year-old was way into my videos too, which was flattering and also made me feel 100 years old. The trail was a longer one, and we got a late start due to traffic on their end, so we were heading back toward the trailhead right around sunset. I do plan for these kinds of things. I've got headlamps or flashlights for everybody in my pack. I always do the math for my group. Even so, regarding the timing, we still had plenty of light. That gold hour light coming sideways through the trees. The 13-year-old was actually filming it on her phone, walking backward, and I was telling her to watch her footing. And it was at that exact moment when the lights went out. I've never experienced anything like what I'm about to tell you. Everybody describes blindness or darkness in nature as pitch black, and they'll be exaggerating somewhat because there's always some kind of light. Think about it. Stars, the glow in the sky, eyes adjusting, you can always eventually see your hand. But this was nothing like that. This was like being in a room with no windows and someone flips the light switch. Instant, total, absolute, perfect darkness enveloping the entire world around us. One second I'm watching this kid film golden sunlight through the leaves, and the next second, the world is just gone. No sun, no sky, no afterimage. All I saw was blackness. That induced a wrongness and fear in me that I've never since felt, because the sun had just been up. It had been right there. You don't go from direct sunlight to nothing. There's no natural thing that does that, that's short of apocalyptic. Clouds can't block sunlight that extremely. Even an eclipse can't do that. Not total darkness. And even then I checked later, obviously, and there was no eclipse that day. The light didn't dim and it didn't fade and it didn't get blocked. It was like it had been deleted. The family lost it. I immediately heard the mom screaming her kids' names. The dad was yelling, "What's happening? What's going on?" And the younger kid was crying his eyes out. And me, I'm supposed to be the calm one, the professional here, right? I brought the headlamps. All I had to do was pull them from my pack. But that's not what happened. This was sudden and overwhelming for me, because what I did was wrap my arms around the nearest tree, and I held on for dear life, like the earth was going to suddenly tip me off the planet. My brain was telling me, hold on to something solid, because nothing else is real anymore. I think I tried to say something, but all I got out was, "Stay where you are," while groping my tree. In my head the whole time, this loop of, "This is not possible, this is not happening," kept going. But in the end, all of this lasted only 5 seconds, and then everything came back exactly the way it left. Sudden and complete golden afternoon light. We saw the leaves trail around us. The world decided to come back to us, thank God. The kid's phone had been dropped during the event, but kept recording. However, all it caught was a normal sky. The camera did not see what we saw. But we were all 5 of us, completely sure about what happened. We talked about it right there, shaking, comparing, and absolutely amazed in the most disturbed way. Yeah, we all saw the same thing and agreed. Total blackness without warning that lasted about 5 seconds. The dad, who I think wanted very badly for there to be a normal explanation, kept saying, "It had to be something with our eyes. Maybe we all looked at the sun for too long." But you don't get that kind of identical eye event at the identical instant for the identical duration. It wasn't a flash or spots, but the opposite. The removal of everything. In a hurry, we half-jogged the rest of the way out. At the trailhead, there were other people there, which was a relief. There was a couple just heading in late and a guy at his truck. I went up and asked them, trying to sound casual, if they saw or noticed anything weird just now, but I didn't say anything too specific. They looked at me like I was on something. They had not experienced anything odd. Their day had been completely normal. We passed a pair of hikers maybe 10 minutes back down the trail too, and the family swore those two hadn't reacted at all when it happened. They'd been visible up ahead, and they just kept walking. So it wasn't the weather, it wasn't an eclipse, it wasn't the whole valley. It was just a box of blackness for 5 seconds just around us that was not recorded on phone. And then it was gone. There is no version of this story I can fit into any good explanation. So you know what I always fall back to? Swamp gas, I guess. Surely we all got high off some puff of gas that came up out of the earth without a smell, and we all lost our eyesight for 5 seconds on the dot. Because look here, Turbo, what else could have made us experience that? Good luck finding an answer. Anyway, thank you for letting me share my story here. You can believe me or not. I'm happy to just be able to share. Be safe on the trails, everyone, and make sure you go for a run or walk every day if you can. Just stay on the path and do your head counts. Forever Late Night Guests. From Pariah. If you'll indulge me, I'll give a bit of background first. My first visit with the paranormal was at the young age of 6, and scattered on throughout my life. I've always felt and seen things hard to explain. Like my father, I deduce all logical explanation before jumping to supernatural reasonings. Not because I don't want to believe, but because I want to prove the existence of a world beyond ours. I work 12 to 16-hour overnight shifts at a DV shelter, taking calls, counseling restless clients who can't sleep, and maintaining shelter safety and monitoring conditions. The shelter itself has been a safe haven for survivors of domestic violence for quite some time. With it comes the chaos of all who enter, past or present. The building itself is old, a modge-podge of other businesses merged over the decades with paint and dreams. We care for survivors out of house through community resources, our own and such. In-house, we care and provide amenities for them and their children. The main building used to be a hotel originally. Some of the older fixtures and architecture are in the halls and tiling in the main stairway, with a hand-carved tile pointing to the hotel lobby. The hotel was later remodeled into an office area space. There are electrical outlets here that still run on lower voltage, I think. We juggle what gets plugged in where constantly. The main office area used to be the keg and storage room for the bar next to the office, until the space was bought up by the shelter I work for now. So here below are my encounters. October 17th, 2024. I was making my rounds when I opened up the door to the meeting room. It's a small office-like space with chairs facing the center and a desk on the far wall by the windows with a vase. Before turning on the light, I could hear breathing. I noticed a dark figure on the floor. It looked like a person curled up. I'd been told by my supervisor that sometimes clients would use the room to watch TV, or to cry while their children slept. I quickly went to find the light to help, worried a client was in crisis. I flipped the light and turned to check. Nothing. My heart skipped a beat as my own breathing quickened, chest getting tight. My brain kicked into the basics of Appalachian rules, so to speak. If you see or hear something, no, you didn't. I kept my eyes up, made a hand sign of protection, turned off the light, and shut the door. My next encounter was not long after, just a couple of days. Same breathing, same curled up shape. It doesn't move and it doesn't grow. It doesn't seem to notice me. Its pattern seems to be when we have young mothers in house and there's a full moon cycle. So I take note of the room, fix or check what I need to, and leave it be. I still make the hand sign before I enter though, just to be sure. January 2025. I don't remember which day, but I do remember my heart dropping faster than a ton of bricks. As I was walking downstairs at the end of my second round for the night, I saw a woman floating above the landing between the stairs back to the lobby. Her clothing gave me Victorian to industrial era vibes. I froze in place, questioning if the Reaper had finally come for me. I was dealing with a lot that month, but just like the other energy, she didn't move to me or away from me, just looked me up and down. I waved, even sheepishly introduced myself, stated that I meant no harm and expected no harm to come to me, that I was just finishing my rounds. She looked me up and down and seemed to nod as I walked past her. Ever since then, she appears at random between 2 to 4 a.m., I've nicknamed her Miss Trish. No idea if that's her real name, but it's what came to mind after our third visit. I asked her, during that visit, to stop jump scaring me when I round the corner, because I can't see until I open the entry door to get to the landing. I swear I heard a giggle in response. Somehow, she understood me, or could pick up my meaning. That's what I like to think, anyway. Now, before I get to the corner of the landing, when I get a warm feeling in my chest and a tingle on the back of my neck, without fail, Miss Trish will be there in her space, floating with a smile, a silent guardian of the shelter. I'll wave or nod, tap the light by her feet to say hello, and continue my rounds. It's kind of nice to be friends with a ghost. April 2025, middle of the month. Again, I was doing my rounds in the second floor common area this time. I had just walked out of the kitchen hallway and into the commons when I noticed an outlined face in the wall. Not quite human, but it clearly had eyes and a nose, but no mouth from what I could see. My darn confident self greeted it, thinking it was another Miss Trish-like energy. But I was wrong. It tilted its head slowly, then craned its head in a way that I thought the head would fall off the wall, eyes fixed on me the whole time as it struggled to keep its head in place. As with all interactions here in the shelter, I stated I meant no harm and expected no harm to come to me. Its head went back into the wall and just watched. I made my hand sign and left the room. This one only seems to follow the pattern of scorned older women. When we have even one in the house, it comes back. After I've seen it once for the night, that's it. I don't nod at it anymore, fearing of what it may do if I engage it any further. Those three are the constant or staple energies in the house that I've been able to map successfully to have a less jump-scare-filled night. In a building that's been patchworked together, there are lots of corners and doors, potentially hiding paranormal guests among the living. There have been other minor encounters, such as the drunk ghost in the offices, stumbling and holding the walls. He surprised me abruptly my first time seeing him. He was right behind the door you have to open to access the offices. He stumbles and seems to hug the walls when he's active. But he's no talker. He's most active on Friday shifts, 1 to 5 a.m. So if I must print anything that night, I wait until 6. Which Friday he appears on is anyone's guess. He doesn't give me heebie-jeebies like some of the other ghoulish guests. We had a client recently bring more than just her baggage through the doors a few months back. During a round check on the 3rd floor, her first night, I opened the door to the hallway, and there was a thing clawing at the door of the client. I panicked silently. I've never seen a short, eldritch horror clawing at someone's door like a lost cat before. Even as it watched me walk the hall, twisting its heads to follow my steps, it kept scratching, scratching, scratching. The following night, the same thing, watching and scratching only at that client's door. Sad to say, but I was thankful when the client finally moved out. I couldn't find any local lore about such a creature in the area, so I assume it's a family tale, as it were. There's always a myriad of drop calls between actual calls through the night. Some of them don't answer, some hang up right away, but others have static or beeping between breathing. Some only ring once, and before I can turn to answer, it's like it never went off. There's never a record in the call logs either for those, but I know I heard it. Most of the other encounters are not as exciting. A ghost in the kitchen here, a random entity in a room there. I try not to psych myself out when a new one makes itself known. I'm aware it's a long shift to work alone. I try not to give every sound credit for the old bones holding this building together. Some nights, it's easier to convince myself than others. If it gets more crowded with our ghoulish guests who are active, well, let's just say, check your local news for an overnight worker who's gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Until then, remember the basic safety rule when working a late night alone in a big building. If you think you see or hear something, no, you didn't. I took the wrong highway, and I almost didn't make it. From William P. 85. I've been working as a truck driver for 3 years, regularly moving merchandise over long distances to different states in my country, Venezuela. I usually transport furniture or heavy items from one warehouse to another, which later supply businesses. My life can be summed up as sitting behind the wheel, stopping between toll booths and gas stations, accompanied by cheap, tasteless coffee, not forgetting, of course, the crumpled receipts on the passenger seat and the constant sound of the engine. I've traveled the entire country looking through the dirty windshield. I've seen all sorts of things, believe me, from beautiful landscapes to scenes too grotesque due to the insecurity of the roads caused by criminal groups. Even so, I always try to take the most traveled roads to avoid running into any impromptu roadblocks, if you know what I mean. What I want to share with you happened during the early morning, one December, on one of the most dangerous stretches of highway. And I say this mainly because of the conditions one has to go through. This stretch has no lighting. It is a long, straight, and desolate road, where many of the accidents occur due to driver fatigue. I already knew what I would have to face. I was prepared for it with a large thermos of black coffee and some sugar to keep me alert during the trip. Around 3 a.m., the road transformed into a black ribbon, illuminated only by my high beams and the clear sky with a few static stars. I had been driving for more than 10 hours by then without rest, barely consciously pushing the accelerator, hoping to arrive on time at the indicated warehouse. I really couldn't afford any delays, much less a discount. That would hurt me quite a bit, especially since I'm starting January in the red. My eyes were feeling heavier and heavier as I drove along the road, but I think what I saw helped me to wake up. Through the truck's rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something emerging from the dry desert bushes to my right. It could have been the pipes marking the road's boundary, perhaps some sort of animal. It was common to see the occasional coyote crossing. I'd even seen pumas on other trips. However, as the minutes passed, this creature appeared repeatedly, each time getting closer to the cargo. That is when I realized something was wrong. Instead of fleeing, it was trying to catch me. At first glance, I can describe it as a tall figure running on all fours, so my first suspicion was that it was a coyote. But no, it was moving at a worrying speed, almost matching the pace of my unit. Once I slowed down to try to scare it, however, that did the trick. But the worst part about that was that I was able to see it better, and what I saw was a grotesquely disproportionate humanoid silhouette, something with excessively long arms, thin legs, and a stride that defied explanation. With my blood running cold, I immediately hit the gas again, going beyond the permitted limit in a matter of seconds. Time continued to pass, and that thing continued to torment me, always remaining in the periphery of my vision, as if it wanted me to notice it, to be aware that it would not leave me in peace, and I'm sure that it could easily exceed my speed to get in front of my truck. When I was trying to intimidate it with the vehicle, it wasn't actually scared at all. Desperately, I tried to contact my company's headquarters by radio, hoping for some miraculous help from the other end. But I only received bad news. The concerned officer informed me that I'd taken a wrong turn. I had ended up on some old road. I was told I should try to rejoin the new one further on to avoid encountering anything dangerous, although I knew the danger was already on one side of me. I quickly explained my situation. He instructed me to keep going, that they would keep me safe somehow. I only needed to follow his instructions. They said to listen. Under no circumstances should I take my eyes off the road, nor should I panic, much less scare other drivers over the radio. Above all, they told me, even if I feel I must, do not stop the truck, no matter what damage it appears to have. He added that he would stay on the lookout for my signal in case of any situations. From that moment on, the journey stopped feeling soporific. I checked the correct route on the navigation system. It was just as they had indicated. I had deviated without knowing when, although luckily further ahead, there was another opportunity to rejoin the correct path. Out in the distance, I could make out some small dim lights from what appeared to be a car stopped on the roadside. As I got closer, I changed lanes to avoid an accident, flashing my high beams to indicate my approach. However, just a few meters away, I saw a creature similar to the one that had been following me, waiting for me on the roof of that car in a deplorable state, which was rusty with missing parts, showing no sign of the owner. Total abandonment. That reminded me of the most important rule I was told. Do not stop. Do not slow down, no matter the damage or anything I saw on the road. I obeyed the rule and continued on, passing the scene by. For a moment, I thought that being would try to catch me, but it didn't. Finally, when I reached the point where I rejoined the highway, the first rays of the sun appeared, breaking the darkness and making the creature that was following me disappear. It didn't seem to leave a trace. Without letting my guard down, I continued until I entered the city to deliver the cargo. Then I contacted headquarters to report that I'd survived. I refused to take any future loads destined for that state, or any other that would require me to take the same route, and my boss accepted this. They even cut off that route so that my colleagues, too, would not encounter the same trouble I had. Borrowed time at the ranch. From someone who tried to help. This is not about a haunting or a monster. This is a showcase of human cruelty, evil in its most mundane form. I'm not exactly a protagonist here. I'm more of an unwilling participant. Names, locations, and other details have been heavily modified, since this situation is not yet fully resolved. Last month, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "Remember me?" followed by a photo, and I did. It was a former friend, former coworker, Ronnie. Only he looked way different than I remembered. I stared at the photo even longer. Back then, he always looked put together, like he had just stepped out of a barbershop, even on his worst days. Now his big bushy beard was gone. He was skinny and pale, with dark circles around his eyes, a buzz cut instead of his flawless hair plastered with pomade. This version of him looked worn down, like life had been sanding him down a little at a time. Ronnie and I used to work together. We did for many years while we were in college, before dropping out, moving back to our town, deciding to open up a bar together. It worked out really well for about 6 months, until Ronnie decided to spend all of our money on booze, weed, and a girl. We lost touch after that. Not entirely. Occasionally, we would grab a beer here and there. He never stopped inviting me to barbecue at his house, but it happened less and less often. I bought a small ranch, and Ronnie moved to LA to pursue a career in music. I would always see his live updates on Instagram, pictures of concerts, small videos of his god-awful music, but we weren't really talking, other than the occasional funny reel. That's why I didn't notice when his posts suddenly stopped. After trading texts back and forth, Ronnie asked if he could call me, and I agreed. On the phone, he told me about his situation. I remember gripping the phone tighter as he talked, pacing around the living room, stopping only to look out the window. Part of me wanted to interrupt him, to tell him he was exaggerating. Things like that didn't just happen, I wanted to say. So here's what I was told. About 1.5 years ago, Ronnie got into a fight with a couple of guys at a bar. He couldn't remember why the fight even broke out, but it was over something stupid. The guys left before he did. He had a couple more drinks and headed out to catch the train. But the guys from that bar were waiting for him by the parking lot, with backup, 7 dudes in total. They jumped him with a 2x4, beat him bloody. Then the leader of the pack got him in a chokehold. But Ronnie had a pocket knife. He reached for it and stabbed the man holding him 12 times. All the shouting and cursing caught the bouncer's attention, who broke up the fight. My friend had 5 different fractures on his face, but nothing life-threatening. As for the guy he stabbed, he was in and out of the hospital for a few weeks. Ronnie thought it was over, a bad night and a bad memory. But I wouldn't be writing this story if that was all. The harassment started slow. His Instagram account began getting tagged in weird posts, with a prize offered to whoever could find him and beat him up. He decided to talk to the police, which seemed like a good idea. Instead, he was held at the station, interrogated for hours, charged with attempted murder. Ronnie's family managed to bail him out, but to this day he's still awaiting trial. I think they took him going to the cops as escalation, and so they escalated as well. They hacked his Instagram account, his bank, and his phone. Blacked out cars started roaming around his girlfriend's house and his mother's workplace. Death threats came to everybody in his life. It turns out the guy he stabbed was associated with a cartel. Which one, I cannot for the life of me disclose. But if you try to guess the second or third one that comes to mind, you'll probably be correct. So there I was, sipping on some bourbon, dumbfounded by the whole thing. Ronnie was calling me from a burner phone, and he told me I was one of the few people he still trusted. He'd been basically on the run, hiding, living off of borrowed money that was about to run out. So he asked me bluntly if he could work here. The place offered fresh country air, nature, and he probably wouldn't have to constantly look over his shoulder. He said that alone would be payment enough. I agreed to do it. How could I refuse my friend? I thought about all these spy movies I'd ever seen and acted accordingly. We agreed to talk details only on public phones. He would ride a Greyhound bus here, and I would pick him up somewhere on the road before the bus could reach town. That's exactly what we did. When I saw Ronnie in person, he was unrecognizable. Everything about him was different. His clothes, posture, even his build. And it wasn't accidental. The man was doing everything he could, so the cartel could not find him. His first days here were all about blowing off steam. We were drinking, shooting cans, grilling, and riding horses, having the time of our lives. 2 good friends reconnecting. He told me about his living situation. He had not left the motel he'd been staying in for about 3 months. Routine slowly settled in, and Ronnie wasn't a bad help. He was good with the animals, and he was in great physical shape, so he could really do the work. At night, as we sat down to eat, I could see that he was happier, lighter. But that would not last long. It was a Wednesday night. We were sitting on the porch, having a few beers after a day's work, when I heard something. A car speeding down the dirt road leading to the ranch. Out here, I don't have many neighbors. Most nights are dead quiet after dark, broken only by insects, maybe the occasional animal moving through the brush. A car that late was not impossible, but it was far from common. I tried to tell myself it was someone who got lost. It could be a truck turning around. But Ronnie stiffened beside me the second he heard it. "Do you hear that?" he asked, already halfway out of his chair. I nodded. The sound was closer now, tires chewing gravel too fast for comfort. Ronnie didn't wait for me to say anything else. He stood up and asked if we could go inside, so we did. We finished our beers in there, then we locked up like we always did, and we went to bed. I woke up around 4 to the distinct sound of car doors slamming and my dogs going ballistic. I got up right away. I could see that the house was lit by headlights from all directions. Cell reception here is spotty, so I had to sneak up to the loft where Ronnie was. I climbed the stairs as quietly as I could. I had my phone ready to dial 911 when I heard the sound of the back door shaking. Thank God we locked it. I couldn't go back down there to my bedroom to try and grab a gun. The loft stairs are in clear view of the kitchen window. So I woke up Ronnie with my hand over his mouth, and I whispered something like, "They're here. I'm gonna leave my phone with you. dial 911 and don't move." I then went downstairs. Just as I thought, there were two guys looking straight at me through the window. They didn't move. They stared at me as I went down the steps. At that moment, I realized a gunfight was not an option. I could see the two of them, but I was sure there were more out there. When I made it to the kitchen, one of them gestured toward the door and mouthed something I couldn't quite understand. So I decided to play dumb. I cracked the window just a bit, enough to ask, "Are you all lost? You probably took the wrong turn back there if you're trying to reach town." They seemed stunned for a second. I managed to sound and look a lot calmer than I felt. Then the bald one frowned and said, "Open the damn door." I was trying to think on my feet and not outright refuse the man. I knew they had to be armed, and the kitchen window would do absolutely nothing to stop a bullet. So I said, all right, I just need to grab my keys." They watched me like hawks as I moved toward the cabinet where my keys were. That ugly gray cabinet saved our damn lives that night. When I installed the alarm system, the technician suggested putting the control panel inside the cabinet. So I typed the wrong code in 3 times as fast as I could. Then the alarm began wailing, and I dove behind the stairs, trying to make myself a small target. I'm not exactly sure how long I stayed there, but I only got up when I saw the red and blue lights. By the time the police reached us, those cartel men were long gone. The officer took us to the station, and Ronnie was sent back to LA in handcuffs. For weeks after, I slept lightly. Any engine noise on the road had me sitting up in bed, listening. The dogs never really went back to normal either. They still stare down the driveway sometimes, hackles raised, like they're waiting for something. I know the ending might be a little anticlimactic, but life is like that. For now, I don't know what happened to Ronnie. He hasn't contacted me since that night. The cartel never came back here either. All I can hope is that Ronnie is still breathing. The Knock That Followed Me Home, from Annie E. This is a true account from my humanitarian posting in 2022. I've changed first names and removed all identifying details, like country, city, organization, for privacy. Now, the story. Just a year ago, I was working in Africa, in the humanitarian sector, in a country at war. I lived in one of the official compounds in the city. It was a secured space with 2 houses. The main house was shared by 6 people, and the second one had been split into 2 smaller flats. I lived in one of them with my roommate. The other was occupied by a neighbor. Around Christmas, the compound emptied out. Only Julie, a friend living in the main house, and I were left. The holidays felt oddly quiet. For once, even in the middle of an emergency setting, there was nothing going on. There was one night when drunk soldiers fired into the air at the club next door. My friend and I were spending most of our evenings together. With the curfew in place and the compound nearly empty, we didn't have many options. I had bought a projector, and whenever we had electricity, we used it to watch films. When we didn't have electricity, we played board games by the light of battery-powered lamps. One evening, as usual, Julie came over from the main house to hang out in my living room. But this time she seemed irritated. "Hey, Mark just asked me if we were doing anything tonight." Mark was a colleague from the NGO we both worked for. I didn't know him very well. Julie was closer to him but had been avoiding him lately. She suspected he wanted to sleep with her. "So, what do you feel like doing?" I asked her. If she brought it up, it usually meant she was torn. "I like Mark's company," she said, "but I don't want him to bother you or anything." "Why would he bother me?" "You know, sometimes he's just a bit weird." "Invite him, only if you want to." "Okay, that's nice of you. I'll call him." Julie left the room to make the call. She came back and we went on with our evening. sipping beers and ordering pizzas for our movie night. Mark arrived about 45 minutes later, since it was always a challenge to find a reliable taxi in the city. The pizzas arrived just after him, and the night unfolded with cheerful conversation and plenty of beer. As we were chatting, I asked Mark how he was finding life in the city. He had just moved to the capital after spending 2 years out in the field. "It's really nice," he said. "I love having real walls, a proper house." Julie and I laughed. We both knew what it was like in the most remote parts of the country. Mark had been living in one of the last tinted compounds in the middle of the desert, far up north. He went on, still amazed by the bars, restaurants, and how easy it was to get food here. "It's fantastic. I mean, you order pizza. Pizza. Even the ghost at home can't kill my enthusiasm." Julie and I looked at each other, puzzled. "Ghost?" Julie asked, unsure she had heard that right. "Yes, a ghost," Mark answered casually. Julie glanced at me. She and I were both skeptics. We both tried to hide our smiles. We didn't want to mock Mark for his beliefs, but we avoided eye contact out of fear we might burst into laughter. "What do you mean, the ghost?" I asked again. "I have a ghost at home," Mark replied, in that same calm tone. "Care to tell us more?" Julie asked, suddenly curious. "Oh, sure, no worries. I have a ghost at home. It doesn't do much, but I see shadows and movement from the corner of my eye. Sometimes I'll find doors, cupboards, or my wardrobe, or my bathroom cabinet open after I just closed them. Furniture will move, and I'll hear strange noises." Julie and I exchanged a glance. We lived in places where it wasn't unusual to have rats, cockroaches, or lizards roaming around. But ghosts? I have frequent nightmares as well. Most of my belongings end up misplaced somewhere else in the flat. It's all really just little stuff. "Okay," I commented. That was all I could say. Julie and I weren't buying what Mark was saying, and we couldn't tell if he was joking or being serious. He spoke with such casualness. He went on, sharing a few more ghost stories from his past. One of them involved a pale white woman who followed him through the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. Julie and I couldn't help ourselves. We laughed and started making jokes. "Imagine spending your days there all dressed up, just to scare random passersby," I said. "Oh, I found a new hobby," Julie added. "Girls, you can laugh, but you'll see one day," Mark said. The conversation eventually drifted to something else, and we went on with our evening. But then Mark checked his watch. "Crap, curfew. I've got 10 minutes to get home, and there's no way I'm finding a taxi at this hour." Julie looked instantly anxious. Nobody wanted to burn the curfew, as we say in French. The military could be rough, and we'd all experienced what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a gun, usually heavy weaponry like a good old AK-47. I knew Mark wouldn't make it in time. No point in putting him in danger. "Relax, we've got a few spare rooms in the compound." Julie looked at me, clearly uneasy. She didn't want to offer a room in the main house. That would have been quite literally leaving the door open for Mark to slip into hers. She liked him, but she wasn't sure what she wanted. I picked up on what her eyes were trying to tell me, so I stepped in. "Mark, my roommate is on holiday. Do you want to use her bedroom?" "Sure, if your roommate wouldn't mind," he asked, glancing towards Julie, clearly waiting for her to weigh in. "Yeah, no worries." "Okay, then I'll stay," Mark replied, still looking at Julie. "It's settled then. It's already midnight. I should probably head to bed," Julie said. "Shall we do breakfast together tomorrow morning?" "Sure, sounds like a good idea," I answered. Julie stood up, ready to leave the room. Mark stayed quiet beside me while I locked both doors. One was made of iron bars and netting, standard for security and mosquito protection. The other was just a regular wooden door. I took the keys out of the lock and placed them safely on the drawer in the entryway. Mark remained next to me the whole time. Just as I was turning away, asking if he needed a shirt or anything to sleep in, we heard a knock at the door. I turned toward it and called out, "Julie? Did you forget something?" You see, the compound walls were thin, and since the houses were built in the 60s, we all had jalousie windows. One large window like that was right next to my front door. If Julie was outside, she would have heard me easily and answered just as easily. Mark kept looking at me. "Annie, that wasn't on the metal door. That was on the wooden one. Julie couldn't knock there. I saw you lock both." "What do you mean, Mark? That I didn't lock the door?" Then again, 3 clear knocks, while I was still talking, while I was facing Mark. "Julie, did you forget something?" I asked again, louder. Silence. I opened the wooden door. No one was there. It was impossible for someone to hide that fast in the yard without me seeing them. I checked the metal door, but it was still locked. I closed the wooden door again, locking it, feeling confused. I took the key out of the lock and placed it in the drawer by the entrance. It was standard habit to avoid anyone reaching through the mosquito net or the jalousie window and unlocking it from outside. Mark looked nervous. I turned to him and asked again if he needed anything for the night. "Annie, that was freaking weird, don't you think?" I didn't know what to say. It was weird, but it could have just been the wood creaking, reacting to the cooler night air after the heat of the day. "So, do you need a shirt or a toothbrush?" I asked, trying to brush it off like nothing happened. That's when I noticed my cat. She was crouched under the couch, ears flattened, tail swishing sharply through the air. A sure sign she was scared. Yeah, a shirt and a toothbrush would be great," Mark said. I left him in the living room and went to grab what he needed. When I came back, he looked smug. "See, it can happen. You both mocked me." For a moment, I wondered if he had done something, knocked on the door himself to prove a point. But I'd been looking straight at him when it happened. If he had knocked on a piece of furniture, I would have noticed. I decided not to dwell on it. I showed him my roommate's bedroom, then I went to bed, like I always do, dead to the world. The next morning, I started a pot of coffee like usual. I was sitting on the couch, sipping from my mug, when I noticed something strange. My keys were back inside the front door. Oh, Mark must have left already, I thought. He could have at least said goodbye. My cat was next to me, calm now. Then I heard a knock on the door. "Annie, you're up?" It was Julie. "Yes, coming." I walked to the door, but it was locked from the inside. Had Mark come back in the meantime? I opened the door for Julie, unsettled. "Hey, any chance you came back last night and knocked on my door?" I asked. "No. Why do you ask?" she said, juggling a carton of eggs, a bag of flour, and a bottle of milk. Do you want coffee?" I offered. "Yes, please." I poured her a cup and began to tell her about what happened. We talked over the sound of sizzling batter and clinking dishes, assuming we were alone. Then a voice behind us said, "Good morning, ladies." We jumped. Mark was there, standing in the kitchen, half asleep. I thought you were gone." "Why would you think that?" "Did you wake up early by any chance, leave and come back?" Julie asked. "No, I just woke up," Mark answered, still half asleep. Julie and I looked at each other, and Mark understood something weird had happened again. We decided not to talk about it. We went on with our breakfast. Mark left around noon that day, and Julie and I spent our afternoon at the swimming pool. From that day on, little odd things started to happen. Like clockwork, 10 minutes after I go to bed, I would hear the slow scrape of a chair being dragged across the tiles, then of someone walking across the flat. At the beginning, I pinned it on the wall being thin and having around 10 people living in close proximity. Yeah, but it was happening as well when I was on my own in the compound. My cat was always startled by the noises too. The first time it happened when I was alone at home. I went to check, my cat following me like my shadow, but very scared. There was nothing. With my roommate, we always found a rational explanation. A rat, a cockroach, a neighbor. But little by little, we ran out of explanations. The weirdest of all was the banging on the roof. Every night after a bang, I would look at my watch, hoping it was just a coincidence. It was always exactly 3 o'clock. We could not explain why. Slowly, we got used to those little things. After all, we were working in a conflict context, negotiating with armed groups, avoiding landmines, seeing the worst that humanity had to offer. A ghost was far less scary than that. My mission came to an end. After 2 years, I got back to France. One night, I was alone at my home, my cat sleeping at my feet. I just put on the alarm and I'd locked my bedroom door as usual. You see, my family house is pretty big and can be scary when you're on your own. But that one night, the knocking returned. 3 clear, heavy strikes on my bedroom door. This time, I didn't answer. Am I crazy? I mean, of course I am, but I don't think I've ever read or received a scary story from 7-Eleven until now, right? Well, today's story comes to us from a Lisa R., and it's titled, The 7-Eleven from Hell. Oh yeah, we've struck gold already from the 7-Eleven franchise. This story shows us what is at risk for you if you decide you just have to have a gallon of gas and you just have to drive home to your wife and kids with that gallon of gas. The gall of some people. You see, some places are haunted, and not all hauntings are of the ghost kind. I'm a Southerner. That's all I'll say about that. I worked at a 7-Eleven for a while. 3 years as a clerk and 1 year as manager, and I quit without notice. I had never done that before, and I haven't done it since. I just stopped showing up. I ended up going back to college after. I have a degree now, and a job that does not involve, well, this, what you're about to hear. I've never been the type of person to see meaning in things. I grew up around people who found the devil in card games and rock music, and the wrong kind of dancing too. And I spent most of my teenage years rolling my eyes at all of it, and I still mostly do. Pokemon isn't satanic, that's just one silly example. When I started as a clerk, my manager was a woman named Mia. Mia was maybe 50 years old, heavy-set, with reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain. I remember how she would look at you if you said something dumb, over the tops of her reading glasses if they were on. She didn't talk a lot, and I liked that. She had been there for a long time, and I never really found out how long. But she ran the place like it was a real business, not just a gas station that happened to sell lottery tickets and microwave burritos. Now, Mia had a son at home, 13 years old when I met Mia, and for a long stretch, that was the only personal thing I knew about her. The kid, and the fact that her husband had left at some point, nobody asked about. Now, her son went bad slowly, and then fast. I caught most of it secondhand, from the other clerks and from the parts Mia let slip, whenever the register tape ran out or a delivery showed up late, and she needed somewhere to put her frustration. Her son started to sneak out. Then he was running with some older boys from the next town over. These were the types of boys everyone else's parents warned them about, and for very good reasons. There was a thing with pills at one point, then a thing with worse than pills. About 18 months into my time there, he got arrested for breaking into a house. I heard it was a dare gone wrong. At least, that's what someone told me. He and 2 others went in through a back window, but the homeowner was there, and he had a gun. He pointed the gun at them until the police showed up. When that happened, I think the boy was 14. But Mia changed after that. She didn't fall apart or anything, not yet. She still came in and did her work, but some of the light in her eyes just faded out. She wouldn't make that face at you over her glasses anymore. She would be ringing up a customer, and her hands would do the work, but her face just wasn't there, if that makes any sense to you. I'd say something to her, and she'd answer a beat too late or a beat too soon. She was there, but the lights were off. She also started to spend a lot of time in our back room. I have to tell you about the back room. Every store has something like that, a place where the overstock goes and the mop bucket lives. Sometimes it's the room with the time clock. Ours was strange, though, for two different reasons. Firstly, the lights did not work. There was a fixture up there with bulbs in it and a switch by the door, and you could flip that switch all day long, but nothing would happen. Mia had put in multiple maintenance requests, but a guy came one time, looked at it, said something about the wiring being messed up behind the wall, but never came back. So you went in with the door propped open or with a flashlight, but most of us just used our phones. The second thing was the door. It stuck. It didn't happen every time, but it happened quite a bit. So much so that we kept a crowbar on a nail just outside the door. The way it stuck was that it only stuck from the outside. If you were inside and tried to open it, for some reason it would work without a problem. But if it stuck and you were on the outside, well, you weren't getting in without the crowbar. When I asked a coworker, he said it was probably the frame or the building had settled and caused it to jam in certain spots. As for Mia, well, she started to go in there quite often. And close the door. Yeah, the room that didn't have working lights and the door would get jammed from the outside, she would go in there. I always assumed she was just needing quiet time. Some dark to meditate or something. You gotta remember, this was a woman whose kid was sitting in a county facility, going down a dark and darker path. Maybe she just wanted a spot where no one would see her face. Of course, people asked, even I asked one time, what she was doing in there. And that was the only time she ever did that over-the-glasses look at me again. And she told me the back was the only truly quiet spot in the building. I didn't bother her anymore about it. The first real story here happened on a slow evening. So slow, in fact, that I'd cleaned the counter like 20 times. A distributor truck came in around 8, which is late for them, and the driver seemed to be in a hurry. He was kind of rude. He dropped the pallet and had me sign and was gone before I could even get a word in. Inventory was my job that night. Keaton was the only other person on. A quiet kid who was 18 if I recall. He had been there a few months and mostly kept to the register. I was on the floor with a scanner gun working through the order when the power suddenly went out. It went out without even a flicker or warning. Everything went at once. The store dropped into the gray non-dark you get from lot lights coming through the windows. I stood there with my now dead scanner in my hand, and I waited for it to come back. When stuff like this happens, it usually pops back on after a minute or two. But this didn't just pop back on. Now, there were no customers in the building at the time. I would have heard the door chime, so it was me and Keaton in the building. I called out for Keaton, but got no reply. I stood up and went to the register, but I didn't find him there. His stool was there, pushed up like he had been there a moment ago, but his phone was gone, which I took to mean he'd gone to the bathroom or stepped out back for air. Except Keaton didn't smoke, and the back door set off an alarm if he propped it, but there had been no alarm. Suddenly I heard a strange and unsettling noise. I'd never used this word before to describe anything, but I'm going to use it here. It was a scuttling sound. A quick, light, and dry sound like a big roach moving across tile floor, except it was up high, perhaps in the wall or in the ceiling. And it was bigger than a roach. It went a few feet, then stopped. After a few seconds, it went again. I stood still and told myself it was a big rat. The power being cut had spooked something in the walls, and I had nearly talked myself into believing that when it moved again. This time it came from the far side of the store, somewhere nothing should have reached that fast. I decided I had to find Keaton quickly. I had to feel safe and fast. I started down the first aisle with my phone light out, and the scuttling came with me. Not toward me, but with me. Whenever I walked, the scuttling thing moved. Whenever I stopped to listen, it would stop. I'd take 3 steps and hear it travel along the ceiling, off to one side, keeping pace with me. But when I froze, the scuttling went quiet. I went from aisle to aisle, calling Keaton's name in a voice that was trying to sound annoyed instead of scared, ducking my head to check the gap under the bathroom door for his shadow. The thing tracked me the length of the store and back. I then went for the front door. Outside, the lot was lit and ordinary and full of people. There was a man pumping gas and 2 women walking toward the door talking, one of them laughing about something. I got to the glass and pushed, but the door didn't budge. I pushed as hard as I could. It was an automatic slider with a manual mode, and I knew how it worked, and it would not move, not an inch. It was like it had been welded into the frame. I began to slap the glass with my palm. One of those women was only 15 feet away from me by then. I slapped the glass again and yelled, and she didn't even look up. Neither of them did. The man at the pump didn't hear me either. I stood at the window slapping the glass and shouting while 3 people in plain sight of me went on with their evening, as though I wasn't standing there. That's when something landed on the floor right behind me. A soft and heavy thud that came from up high and hit the tile about 10 feet back. After that, there were footsteps, wet, flat slaps on the tile, walking towards me, and I couldn't bring myself to turn. They came right up to my back, close enough that I should have felt the heat of a body. Then they stopped, and I began to hear breathing. The breathing came from right behind my head, a wet and thick sound. It sounded like something that seemed very interested in me, like whatever it was had found what it had been looking for. I turned around in an instant. I think I screamed, but I can't be sure. If a sound did come out, it only came out halfway. But when I looked, there was nothing there. And the lights were back on. Everything was back on as it should be. The store was back to normal in all its ordinary glory. The door behind me gave a little electronic chirp and slid open. A customer walked in, a regular, an older guy who came in most nights for cigarettes. He stopped when he saw me, looked at me standing there with my hand on the glass and my mouth open, and he said, "You all right, hon?" I nodded rapidly, dusted myself off, and went over to the counter. A minute later, he came up with an item, didn't say anything, and I rang him up. My hands did my work, while the rest of me hung back. A chill had settled over my being that had not yet left. I probably looked like I'd seen a couple Caspers. Keaton came back about 20 minutes later. He said he had been in the stockroom and had not heard me. He didn't even notice the power going out. He wouldn't quite look at me when he said it. I asked him where his phone had gone if he'd been in the stockroom, since the stockroom didn't have his stool, and he said he didn't know what I was talking about. And we left it there. I was too aggravated and creeped out to push any further. I went home and had trouble sleeping. The next morning, I was hoping I could wake up and tell myself it was a dream, but I couldn't do that. It was very real, a very vivid memory. A few weeks went by with nothing. I'd almost categorized all this weirdness as tricks that the tired mind plays on you. But then the back room got Keaton. During a morning shift that was very slow, Keaton had gone back to clock in or grab a case of something. I don't remember exactly which it was. I was up front at the time. After enough quiet that it started to bother me, it landed that I hadn't seen him come out in a while. I went down the hall and the back room door was shut. I tried to get in, and of course, it was stuck. Typical. I knocked and said his name, telling him that the door was being a jerk again, asking him to push it open from the inside. No reply. I knocked even harder, yelling, "Keaton, come on, push it open!" I could hear something in there, but I couldn't tell what it was. I put my ear to the gap, and it was definitely him. After a few seconds, I could tell what I was hearing. Crying. Quiet crying. Like he was trying not to be heard. He wasn't answering me, and he wasn't opening the door, but from what I could hear, he could have opened it any time he wanted to, easily. I pulled the crowbar off its nail. I jammed it into the gap and put my weight into it. The door soon came open with that disgusting metal screech. I turned my phone light on, and I went in. There I found Keaton in the far corner, on the floor, folded up with his knees against his chest and his back to the shelves. His face was slack. He was looking at the middle of the room, at the patch of floor my light didn't quite reach. The door opening didn't startle him a bit. He turned his head and looked at me. There was no emotion to it, despite the tears streaming down his face. Something like that you'd expect, embarrassment or maybe relief. But there was none of that. He looked at me and reminded me instantly of Mia, completely void and distant. Suddenly he stood up, and he walked past me without a word, close enough that I had to step back to let him by. He then went up the hall and out through the front. The door gave its little chirp, and that was the last I ever saw of Keaton. He didn't come back for his next shift, and he didn't return for a paycheck. When I went investigating later, nobody had a number on him that still worked. I stayed in the back room after he left that day, crowbar in hand. I shone my light into the corner where he had been. The floor was bare. There was a water stain on the concrete and a dead roach on its back, and the flat cardboard where he'd been sitting. I put the light up into the dead fixture, then along the shelving, and finally I pointed it at the corner again. There was nothing in the room with me, yet I stood listening to the building tick and settle until my arm got tired of holding the phone up. Months went by after Keaton walked out. The store stayed open as usual. People bought their gas and their scratch-offs and their wax paper sandwiches. But I stopped going in the back room alone if I could help it. I'd have someone open the door, hold it open, or prop it open with a cinder block that we kept. I would tell new hires it was because the door was stuck, which was true enough, so I didn't have to tell any lies about how creepy that room felt. How you never felt alone in that room, even if you were. Even so, the next 2 new hires quit inside of a month. One girl, Brittany, didn't even finish her first shift. She came up front about an hour in, set her vest on the counter, and said she was not built for this, and walked out to her boyfriend's car. But I asked her first, built for what? And she wouldn't say. She kept glancing back down the hall toward the storeroom while she untied the vest. Then she was gone. Mia kept working, though, but probably when she shouldn't have been. Her boy came home from the county thing eventually, and whatever they had done with him in there hadn't stuck, because these stories started right back up. Then one of them stopped being a story about him and turned into a story about her. Word around the store was that he came home one night on something. He was looking for money that she didn't have or simply wouldn't give. When she said no, he took a metal pot off the stove and hit her in the head with it. She was out a week. When she came back, she had stitches in her scalp. A row of them. They'd had to shave a good patch of her hair to get the needle in, so the wound sat there plain above her ear with the bare skin around it. It was yellow-green at the edges. She wore her work cap pushed back like she always did, which meant the cap did nothing to cover it. I'm not sure it occurred to her to try to cover it. She rang up customers with that on the side of her head, just daring anybody to say a word. Nobody did. A man one afternoon stared a beat too long at it while she counted his change, and she looked up, saying, "You need a bag for that," and he took his stuff and left without a word. I started to pick up shifts. I didn't make a thing about it. I'd see the schedule and tell Mia I'd take her Thursday clothes so she could get home at a decent hour. Or I'd come in early so she didn't have to open alone. After the third or fourth time, she got used to it. You see, I liked Mia. I'd liked her since the day she looked at me over those glasses, telling me I'd stacked the cigarette cartons wrong, then showing me the right way. With stuff like that, she was always sure to make you not feel stupid about it. Her whole life had gone sideways, and seemed to be staying sideways or worse, and there wasn't a thing I could do about any of the big parts. So I did some small favors, which was giving her some hours back. At some point, a man began coming in. I noticed him the first time mostly because he didn't fit in. We've got truckers and farmers and high schoolers and the regulars who bought the same 4 things every day. But this guy, he was none of those. He had dark hair slicked straight back. He was older than me, I'd say around late 30s. He had an accent of some sort, I think from somewhere up in the Northeast. His words came out quick, and he was hard to keep up with, but it was obvious he did not belong within 300 miles of where we were standing. He bought a coffee and a pack of gum, but the entire time he looked at me. When I handed back his change, he held my hand a second too long, and he smiled, as if we'd agreed on something that I didn't know about. He came back, too, not every day, thankfully, but often enough, and every time it was the same routine. The coffee, the staring, some line about how a girl like me shouldn't be stuck behind a counter in a place like this. I gave him the customer service nothing smile and pushed his change across and said have a good one. And for a while that held him at arm's length. But he got braver. The lines got more direct, less like jokes. One time he asked what time I got off. Another time he asked if I had a boyfriend, then laughed when I said I did, like I'd told him something cute. The flat, quick voice he had didn't change pitch when he said any of it, and something about it got under my skin. One time he reached across the counter, tucking a piece of my hair back behind my ear before I could pull away, and I told him immediately, "Please don't do that." He held his hands up and grinned, saying, "Easy, easy," as if I was the one that did something wrong. I mentioned him to Mia, saying there was a guy who would not take the hint. I remember her telling me that some people come in here for the wrong reasons, but she went right back to her paperwork and wouldn't say much more than that. I should have asked what she meant, but I kept thinking I had everything handled. He was just a creep, and creeps eventually find a different person. He came in one afternoon when my coworker at the time was on his break out back, and the lot was empty and the store was dead. I knew the second that chime rang who it was. I looked up and saw him, and with a smile on his face, I knew the timing was no accident either. He'd been watching, waiting for a moment to come in when I'd be completely alone. He came in slow and steady, watching me, hands in his jacket pockets, and he did not go get a coffee. He leaned on the counter. It was worse than the other times, the way he talked. It felt like his words were sliding out of him and onto me. I told him he needed to leave, that I was not comfortable with him being there. But he smiled. He then steadily came around the end of the counter, putting himself in the gap where the counter opened into the rest of the store, the only way out from behind the register, unless I jumped or climbed over it. He then stood there with that disturbingly patient look, like he was letting me know who was in charge. I'm not sure how long we stood like that. Long enough that I was starting to think about everything that I had within reach. I knew there was a box cutter in the drawer. There was a phone nearby. I even wondered if anyone would hear me through the back if I screamed for my coworker. But then he was the one that screamed. A high-pitched male scream, so sudden and loud that I covered my ears and felt startled the moment it happened. His whole body twisted up at the same time. His hand went grabbing back over his own shoulder toward the middle of his back. His fingers were clawing at something, for a spot apparently between the shoulder blades where a person's hand can't reach on their own. He was desperately trying to get to it. He spun around like a dog after its tail, reaching, his face still contorted in a scream. That dark charm he thought he had was now gone right out of him, and as he turned, I saw the back of his shirt. There was a rip in the shirt, a split running across the fabric between his shoulders that I'd swear had not been there when he walked in, though I admit I couldn't be sure about that. But through the rip, on his skin, was a welt, red and raised. It even glistened like it was wet. It looked as though a hot iron had just left his skin after staying there for 5 seconds straight. He stopped reaching, then faced me again, but now he looked scared, like in a pure animal instinct way. Instead of saying anything else, he ran out through the door so fast he hit the frame with his shoulder. In moments, he was across the lot and gone, and I never saw him again. Not once. A man who'd come in 3 times a week for a coffee he didn't want, and he never came back for so much as gas. My coworker came in from his break, and he asked why I was white as a sheet. I told him a guy had given me trouble, but left right away, which was true. I left out the welt, because I had no idea what that even was. Not long after that event, Mia stopped coming in for work. She'd call out, then she'd call out again, and the calls got further apart. When she finally came in to sign the resignation paperwork, she didn't have her hat on, and the hair had grown back patchy over her scar. She looked at me, and she said to me, "Sorry to abandon you like this." I told her there was nothing to apologize for. She hugged me then, which she had never done before, and I could feel her trembling. At the door, she stopped and looked back at the hallway, and she said, "Please don't stay late here by yourself, okay? Just be safe." Then she left, and I still have never seen Mia again. 2 weeks later, I heard about her son from a customer who knew her family. He'd gotten a hold of something that was going around, one of those drugs they keep warning about on the news, the kind where a dose the size of a few grains of salt is enough to kill you. They found him in his room. Then I heard from the same channels that brought me everything else about that family that Mia had gone the same way not many days behind him. Whether that was an accident, or whether a mother who'd lost the only thing she had left simply couldn't take it, that was news I didn't want to know, so I didn't go looking for it. But immediately after, things in the store got worse. It started the morning I heard about Mia. I was opening, and the store was empty at the time. I could feel eyes on me. Someone was looking at me. I felt the prickle on the back of my neck, and it did not let up. I'd turn around and the aisles would be empty, and I would check the little convex mirror in the corner. There would be nothing in it but chips and motor oil. That feeling stayed all shift, and it came back the next day. It did not leave again the whole time I worked there. Under it, faintly, I began to hear that scuttling sound again. Never as loud as that first night. It was like a thinner version of it, way off in the walls or the ceiling. A few feet of quick movement, then a stop. Like it backed off a distance and was content to watch from there. I'd hear it during the dead hours, and I'd stand still with a price gun in my hand, listening to it not come any closer. Felt like I was going crazy. The district manager soon after offered me Mia's job. Manager, salary, keys, and everything. And I took it. I needed the money for school. Plus, being the one with the keys was better than being the one who got locked in, right? But part of me knew this was a bad idea. One night I had to count overstock in there. I propped the door open with the cinder block. keeping my phone light pointed at the corner the entire time. I was in too much of a hurry, and I got the count wrong twice. It was hard to focus on what I was doing. Feeling watched and hearing the occasional scuttle, I felt as though something might pounce on me at any moment. Around that time, I started to see a man named Nathan. He worked at an auto parts store off the same highway. We'd gotten to talking. He was a nice guy, and I needed that in my life at the time. When we started dating, he knew I closed late. He didn't like the idea of me walking to my car in that lot at midnight, so he started to pick me up. I'd leave my car at home and he'd run me in and collect me at close. He used to come inside and wait while I cashed out the drawer and ran the totals. The first few nights he did that, and I really liked it. We would talk about anything and everything, and I would stop feeling so watched and uncomfortable. But then he stopped doing that. Instead, he would show up in the lot and text me that he had arrived. One night I asked him why he didn't just come in there like he used to. He got a little sheepish and said the place gave him the creeps. Said the building just felt off to him the longer he was staying in there. He'd rather sit in the truck with the radio on than stand around in there waiting. I told him that was fair, even though I felt kind of angry at him. Couldn't he just come inside for me so I could feel safer? I didn't tell him he was right about that feeling. So he continued to wait in the lot. He'd park nose out facing the door so he could see me lock up, and I'd come out and we'd drive home. It was nice having a normal routine at the very least. But one night, I was cashing out, and I heard Nathan screaming. Nathan's scream came through the glass from the lot. It reminded me of the way that dark-haired man had screamed when that welt formed on his back. But this time I wasn't thankful for it happening. Instead, I was terrified. I dropped the drawer and I ran. I threw open the doors, and the whole time he was making sounds out there I'd never heard a person make before, because now they sounded worse than that man's screams. I ran through the cold, seeing his truck in the usual spot, nose out toward the doors. He was inside with the dome light on, twisting around the driver's seat, looking back and forth over his shoulder, toward the rear and sides of his truck. The doors were locked. I grabbed the handle and it didn't give, and I slapped the window and yelled at Nathan to let me inside. He turned and saw me, but for half a second he didn't move. It was like he had to make sure it was actually me. Or maybe he was deciding if opening the door for even a moment was a good idea. Then he hit the unlock button, and I yanked open the door. "Get in," he said. I got in. I jumped through the open door, having to climb over him. I sat in the passenger seat, and he threw the vehicle into reverse before I had the door shut. "Nathan, I didn't even lock the doors yet," I told him. His face was covered with sweat, and his breath was coming out in a pant. "What happened?" I asked. As he drove, he kept glancing into the mirror. Finally, he said, "There was something out there. Something was running around the back of the truck. It came up to the driver's side and clawed at the door. I heard it. I felt it through the door. Something was clawing to get in. I caught glimpses of it. I swear it wasn't a person, but I couldn't see all of it." He had pulled out of the lot too fast. The back end slid on the cold asphalt before the tires caught. I turned around in my seat to look behind us. I looked back at the store, seeing it getting further away. Just as we swung out onto the highway, I saw something in the side mirror. Something came around the corner of the building. Low, about 3 feet tall at the very most, but it was moving on all fours or something. That's what I think it was doing anyway. Maybe that explains the scuttling sound I always heard. It came around the side of the store and to the edge of the light, but by then we were on the road, and I could no longer see it. That part I waited to tell Nathan about. He was rattled enough at the moment. I figured one of us actually directly seeing it was plenty for the night, but I did tell him later when we calmed down. It became a shared experience. Another person saw this inhuman thing that apparently lived at the 7-Eleven. Sounds ridiculous, right? I would not have believed what my eyes saw had I not had several encounters with things at that store already. I kept going with the manager job through the spring and into the summer. It wasn't a constant haunting. I would feel eyes on me pretty frequently, yeah, but most days nothing happened, you know. No demon girls twisting their heads around, crawling on the ceiling, that type of stuff. When I've shared this story with people before on occasion, they picture it like a haunted house in the form of a 7-Eleven, like the walls are supposed to bleed, but it wasn't like that. It was a gas station. People bought taquitos and I would reconcile the safe, and I would ignore the scuttling and those eye-on-me sensations. It's crazy how you can get used to anything if it doesn't touch you. And for a very long time it did not, in fact, touch me. It was just watching. But what I should have been wondering was if it was waiting. Maybe it was letting me get comfortable. Now, after it's all happened, I think that's what it was doing. 2 things happened that summer before the last night. The first was the cooler. We had a walk-in behind the reach-in doors. It was a big refrigerated room where the milk and the beer and the overstock drinks lived. You got into it through a heavy insulated door with a metal latch and a glow tape strip so you could find the handle in the dark. The light in there worked, at least, unlike the back room, but the bulb was old and would flicker, threatening to turn off. At least, that's what it made me feel like. I was in there on a morning shift restocking energy drinks when the door swung shut behind me. Now, that's not exactly creepy. It did that sometimes, so no mystery there. The floor wasn't level in that section, so I kept on stalking. But then, that flickering light did what I always feared it would do. It went out. Instantly, my mind was filled with dread, reminding me of that day with Keaton. Except this time, I was standing in a refrigerated box with no window, and a door I now could no longer see. It was cold and blackness for me. I heard breathing. It was very close to me, at the level of my ear and off to the right, where the shelves were at a corner. I knew it was the same breathing I'd heard back then. I couldn't even scream in that moment, and I had nowhere to go. What was I going to do? I reached for where the glow tape should be. My hand found the latch on the second try, and I came out of that cooler into the bright, ordinary store so quickly, I went down on one knee on the tile. When I looked back through the open door, the light was on and the room was empty. This thing, it enjoyed playing mind games with me. I propped the cooler door after that. Every time I had to go in there, I used a milk crate so it physically could not close while I was inside. The second thing that happened was Vincent. Vincent was a new hire, the milk crate kid, 19 and good with the customers and useless at closing. One night about 3 weeks before the end of my job, he called me at home, off shift, around midnight. I'd left him to close with another guy, and they'd locked up fine. But Vincent called me from his car in the lot, and his voice was extremely strange. He said he needed to ask me something, and he added that he needed me to not think he was crazy. I told him to go ahead. He said, "When you're in the back room, have you ever heard it say your name?" I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone to my ear. "Vincent? What do you mean by that?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but my ears already burned with fear or dread or whatever it was. He said he had been pulling a case of motor oil off the bottom shelf with the door propped open, and his light was on. But something had said his name from that dark corner where even the light from a flashlight seemed to be absorbed. He said it wasn't very loud, right at the edge of his hearing, in a voice he didn't recognize. It had said, "Vincent." It shook him up so bad he dropped that case and ran out. He told me he was not going to go back in there alone, and he wanted to know if that made him a coward. I told him that it didn't, and I declared right there on the phone that I would handle the back room myself from then on. That way he and the other workers never had to go back in there again. And I meant it. He seemed way too happy about that. He thanked me in such a way it was like I'd lifted a car off his body. After he settled down, he asked, "You've heard it too, haven't you?" "I've heard things in there, yes, Vincent." He said okay, thanked me again, and hung up. However, Vincent quit a week later. But he did give his 2 weeks' notice, like a decent person. Then he was just gone. Off to a different job. I think I heard it was a tire place. Look, I didn't blame him at all. I would have done the same thing if it weren't for me saving up tuition. My default plan was 3 months away anyway. Get out of here and go to college. I kept telling myself just 3 more months. Then after that, I'd be in a dorm room, probably 200 miles away. This would all just be a story I told at parties. A story I no longer had to believe. I didn't make it to 3 months. The last night I worked there was a closing shift. I was alone for the back half of that shift. That wasn't supposed to happen. I'd scheduled myself and a girl named Tara. However, Tara's kid got sick. She approached me around 9 after receiving the call, explaining the situation and asking if she could leave. I had no qualms with letting her leave. The store was dead at the time, and I was 3 weeks from never seeing the place again. I figured I'd rather close alone than make a single mother choose between her job and her sick kid. So from about 9:30, it was just me. Once she was gone, it didn't take long for that watched feeling to return with a vengeance. It knew I was alone. It needed me alone. At 11:40, the lights suddenly went out. I had just looked at the register clock, thinking about the count, but then the store dropped into that utter darkness. The whole thing at once, just like the first time. But there was something different this time. You see, last time nothing was affected outside. People walked around and used the gas pumps, and it was normal. But when I looked out a nearby window, which I could feel from the glass on my fingertips, the gas pump lights were off too, even the sign from the store. This time the void wasn't just inside with me, but outside too. The only light left in my entire world at that very moment was the green stutter of the register's battery backup, throwing a sickly glow about 3 feet in every direction. I did not move. I stood in that little green pool, and I listened for any sound. For a few seconds, it was quiet. I heard only the ticking sound of the dead coolers giving up the cold. But then I heard it coming down off the ceiling. I heard it land right out past the end of the counter in the dark, right where the candy aisle started. And then I heard footsteps. They weren't coming toward the front this time. Instead, they were going away from me, toward the back of the store, down the hall. Then I realized it was going towards the back room. Lisa. Something said my name. Something from way down in the darkness of the hall. Then it said it again. It was calling me back there. It wanted me to come down the hallway in the dark and to open that door that only opened from the inside, probably to find out what had been breathing down my neck for the last couple of years. Every part of my body begged me to make a run for the front door, to escape, but I remembered the first time this happened. I could not open the doors then, and I knew that I could not open them now. Even if I wanted to try, I'd be stumbling around in the darkness, hoping that that thing didn't come hunting me down. I made a different choice this time. There was a fire exit at the back corner of the store, past the coolers. A steel door with a crash bar and a sign on it that said, "Alarm will sound." It led straight out into the side lot by the dumpster. It was unfortunately quite close to the hall, but it opened with a push, no key, no struggle, and an alarm would go off. But that might be the most welcome thing I could imagine right then. I went for it. I left the register, open drawer and all, even my jacket on the hook, and I went down the side of the store in the dark with my hand out for the cooler doors to guide me. I went cautiously fast, and the footsteps in the hall suddenly stopped. But they didn't stop for long, because they changed direction. I began to hear it coming down the hallway towards me. The wet slapping sound, moving faster now, picking up speed. Moments later, it changed into scuttling, and the breathing turned into panting. It was getting closer by the second. It said my name a third time, and it sounded angry. Its patience was gone. It didn't like what I'd chosen to do. I found the door, and I hit the crash bar with both hands and all of my weight. The door didn't open. A fire door with a crash bar, a door that by law has to open from the inside. I hit it, and it only gave half an inch before stopping, like it had hit a brick wall. Or maybe something was holding it shut from the outside, and yet out there was a lot with no one in it. The alarm didn't even sound, and that thing behind me was right there, right at my back, and I felt its breathing once again. I did the only thing there was left to do. I turned around and put my back against the door. I faced it. If I was gonna die, I thought, I wasn't gonna let it happen where I couldn't see it. I was going to face my fate. The green glow from the register somehow reached just barely down the side aisle, revealing an empty floor and the cooler doors with my greenish reflection, but there was nothing else. No figure, no monster on all fours. The thing is, that breathing kept coming right in front of me at the height of my chest, in the empty air, close enough to feel and to even smell it. It smelled of wet dog and hot pennies, and the air in front of me even felt warm. I stood there dumbfounded. My eyes were moving a mile a minute, trying to figure out what I should be looking at, what I should be looking for, until something touched me. I'd been expecting a claw or a welt to form on me like that man's back, but instead I felt a hand, a large and cold hand, and I swear there was one more finger on it than there should have been. It touched me right in the center of my chest and pushed. Gently, it pushed me flat against the door, and it leaned its weight into me carefully. The breath was starting to hit me in the face now, directly, and it spoke my name again, inches from my own face. I closed my eyes hard, fighting down a scream that was coming up my throat. At the same time, I dug my hand into my pocket, closing around the ring of store keys. I fit one of them between my knuckles and gripped it hard. In one quick motion, I swung my fist with the key like a blade into whatever was in front of me that I could not see. I made contact with something that felt like flesh. There was no sound in response. What happened instead was that the lights inside and outside came back on, and I went fumbling backward out the fire exit. I landed on my back, knocking the wind out of me, and the alarm began to sound. I lay there on the asphalt next to the dumpster, under a sky full of stars. For a moment, I was expecting that scuttling sound to come out after me, but it didn't. I got up, and I walked over to my car and got in. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off. the store key still in my fist. When I got back home, I went to the kitchen counter and turned on the light. I looked at the keys still in my fist, and on the one between my knuckles, the one I'd struck that thing I couldn't see with, I swear to you, there was something on that key. A dark, wet smear, beginning to dry brown at the edges already, and a single hair caught in the teeth of the key, coarse and dark, too long for any of the hairs on my head. I did not go in the next day, and I did not call in either. I had Nathan drop off the keys whenever he had the chance to, and that was the end of it. The district manager, who I'm sure was very pissed, left 3 messages, but I didn't even listen to them. I deleted the messages and blocked their number. I wonder if when they got the keys, they wonder what that strange brown stain was. I didn't bother washing that key. That gunk can stay at the store where I found the gunk, and the thing it belonged to. I started school 3 weeks after I left. I'm fine now. I know stories like these might change people for good, but I'm not even scared of the dark, because I don't have to work at that 7-Eleven anymore, and that scuttling thing can be someone else's problem. Life is good now. There's really 2 things I left with, though. One being that I wish Mia was still around. She deserved a better life. And the second thing is, the paranormal is very real, because I have no freaking way to explain what happened to me otherwise. It wasn't a gas leak, I've heard that before. If you really want an answer from me, that was a demon, plain and simple. A demon that liked to mess with people, and it just happened to make its home at a damn convenience store. I've never been to a 7-Eleven before, but after this story, maybe it's time I do go. Maybe grab a big ol' Slurpee and the fattest burrito I can find, and wait for the cute little demons to come scuttling at me. I might bring one home, name it something stupid like Tomothy. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on my other show, by the way, called Unexplained Encounters, where I, of course, narrate more scary stories, except this time about the unexplained specifically, and a lot of outdoorsy monster stuff. If you have a scary work story, send it to us at erie.fm/submit. And while you're there, you can support me, this show, and all of EerieCast by becoming a premium EerieCast member. You'll unlock tons of hours of scary bonus content and audiobooks that only members get to enjoy. All of that and more over at erie.fm. EERIE.fm. Till next time, everyone, I'll be clocking out, but I'll be back again real soon.